check out my subtle visual storytelling. We have the rainbow granny shawl representing the gay and the sword representing the high fantasy. And also the gay, because if you're a woman with a sword, you're automatically a little bit gayer. That's just the law. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and people tend to assume that I love high fantasy books. And it makes sense if you know about my other hobbies. I go to Renaissance fairs, I LARP on TikTok, I play TTRPGs, I go to SEA events, which, while being more realistic, historical based, still has an element of fantasy to it. I freaking own a sword and elf ears, and don't worry, it's a prop. So in general, most people are like, oh yeah, she just must love high fantasy. And it's always awkward when I have to explain, no, actually, high fantasy is one of the toughest genres for me to read and is one of my lesser read of the genres I will read. I will read it, but it's not that much. And I always feel bad when indie authors send me review requests for high fantasy books because a lot of other indie reviewers are like very into that. You got Spiffbo and all of those awards and stuff. But I'm a warn y'all right now. If you come at my inbox with a standard high fantasy, the odds are not in your favor. At least if it's straight. Don't ask me why, but any high fantasy book immediately becomes more appealing to me if protagonists are queer. It automatically, my love for gay books outshines my struggle with high fantasy. And so we're going to talk about that today. My favorite high fantasy books, and they will be mostly indie because I'm me, but we also do have a couple traditionally published because I'm not getting more into traditionally published books, but I like to think I'm rounded out, so we're going to go with it. Regardless, let's jump right into the first one. The first one we have is Where Shadows Lie by Allegra Pescatore. This one is at the forefront of my mind currently because I am in the middle of reading the third book as I film this, and it was low-key the inspiration for making this video, but this book had me from the first review request email because the tagline of the synopsis is chef's kiss. Because the synopsis begins with the sentence, "The chosen one is dead." And I loved this premise. So basically, this book begins with what would probably be the final scene in a more traditional high fantasy. The young prince, having learned that his father is a tyrant, has joined up with the rebels and is on the last stages of a plot to assassinate his father and take the country back. Only he has neglected to tell his younger sister any of this. Eleanor is disabled and is often overlooked or thought of as too weak to be involved in anything, and so everyone has kept this from her. So when these rebels come in during one of the courts and attack her father, she fights back and is accidentally the reason the plan fails and her brother dies. And as a result, Eleanor, the disabled disaster bisexual, now has to step up and learn everything Will learned before her and be the one to take on her tyrant father. I loved this premise. Taking out the generic chosen one and letting someone who would have just been a sickly side character in another high fantasy be the one to take the lead was so intriguing to me. And admittedly, I kind of still struggled with this one because the magic system in this series is so confusing to me. In this world, magic is funneled through and enhanced or detracted by circuits and metals like gold and copper, and 2.5 books in as I film this, I still don't fully understand any of it. So it's a little bit confusing, but I love the wide cast of characters. I love the queerness because Eleanor has a lover, Claire, and it's kind of that they know that they're never going to end up married together because she's the princess and she's going to end up, you know, having an arranged marriage with someone else. But over the course of the trilogy, there's a lot hinted at polyamorous marriages and polyamory just kind of being a thing, especially among the nobles who kind of like have to understand that the person you actually love isn't the person that's going to be politically advantageous for your family to marry. And I love that the series doesn't try to be like, oh yeah, all of these people are suddenly going to throw out all of the responsibilities that have been put on them over the course of their life and marry for love. Like, they're still acting like people that have been raised in this very noble court world where they've been raised knowing they're probably going to end up in an arranged marriage and just have to accept it. So there's a lot of emphasis on what I like to call practical polyamory, the idea that hopefully you'll still be able to be the person you love even when you're married to someone else type of thing. But I am currently in the middle of book 3 and y'all, so many gigantic big things. It was really confusing for me at first because there are so many moving parts over the course of the series. There's a lot of those scene in this place with Eleanor and that whole stuff, and there's like a scene in the desert, and you're like, what do these desert people have to do with anything? And then there's like a scene in a totally other place with like a dragon, and you have no idea how the dragon like ties into anything. Like a lot of that, a lot of especially in the first book, a lot of disparate things that don't start even wrapping up until I would say even halfway through the second one. I will say the second one feels a little bit wheels spinning-y in that like in the third book, they're still dealing with the direct fallout from the first book. So the second book does struggle a little bit with second book syndrome. However, the second book mainly uses its time to build up relationships. And since I'm here for the queerness, that didn't bother me that much. But I am really invested to see how this plays out. I don't think I'll have the review done by the time this video comes out, but definitely stay tuned because I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be really excited about that. Although obviously, I guess if you want to watch my review for the first one, I will have that down in the description below. The next one is one I reviewed a while ago, and that is All the King's Traitors by Keelan Rivers. This one also has an excellent tagline. So I guess if you're sending me an indie review request for a high fantasy, your goals are make it gay and give it a cool quippy one-liner. But this one, the tagline is, you would be wise to question your god. And this is all about a kingdom that is, again, ruled by a tyrant king, only in their mythos, the king is also a god. And so it's a lot of ruling through supernatural fear. I specifically loved this one because we have a disparate cast of characters with a lot of representation. We have things like anxiety disorders, we have queer characters, we have a trans character that is just accepted as trans, like there's not institutional transphobia, which like you don't need it. You already got a tyrant king that's like leading through tyranny. Like we don't need to also have transphobia. Like it's fine, the tyranny is enough. But what I really liked from this one is the magic system, because the magic system is literally based on rocks that fall from the sky, magic rocks that fall from the sky, and they hit a thing. Whatever thing they hit, that rock becomes like the way to wield basically the elemental version of that thing. And you have to pick it up, and the first person basically to pick it up gets to be the wielder of that thing. I'm not explaining this well. So for example, magic rock falls from the sky, falls in water. Person picks it up, they can now like control water and make a whoosh. But also, one of my personal favorites was one of the rocks falls and hits a bird. So now someone is just like the bird person summoning birds. Like I love this aspect. And this one is again pretty disparate in you have a lot of different characters who don't seem readily connected at first, but you also have, you know, a young princess going through like all of these challenges to try and challenge the tyrant king, and it's kind of a not distinctly Hunger Games-y situation, but like a slightly more deadly Olympics. But we have several characters that are queer, and messy queers too, which I also love because we should let the queers be messy. We should not always have to be the paragons of goodness. But there are like, you know, a man that has to decide whether he should side with his husband or the child that is currently in the thrall of the God King, and what is he willing to do to keep that child safe, even if it means betraying it. Like, it's so good. It's so good. I love it. And in general, it's been so long. I really need to get back to this series. I don't know, because I never got a review request for the next one, and that's fine. But usually, if I don't get the review request, I don't necessarily continue the series on my own. So I'll have to double check, see if the author would still be interested in a review for this sequel, or if I am continuing this on my own. Although if I am, I'm probably continuing in ebook form, mostly because I literally don't have room either on my shelves or in this office to get more shelves. We just gotta accept that a ton of physical books aren't gonna be a thing I can do, but I still highly recommend this one. Up next, we have Queen of All by Anya Lee Josephs. This is another fantasy that takes who would be a side character in a standard story and makes them the protagonist. This is all about Jenna, who has this childhood friend, Cece, who mysteriously showed up at their farm years ago, but then turns out is actually a descendant of, like, royalty and is being summoned back to court to have an arranged marriage with said royal dude. And she tags along with Cece to go do the court thing. And at first I was afraid that, like, maybe it would be maybe a little boring because Jenna wasn't the one that, was in an arranged marriage with a maybe skeevy dude. But the book sets it up brilliantly because Cece is so caught up in having to go to, like, fancy parties and dinners and constantly meeting with nobles that Jenna is the one that has to, like, sneak around and talk to people and uncover the secrets and the revelations. So the fact that she's the protagonist actually works out really well because realistically, or at least, in the verisimilitude of this setup, Cece wouldn't be allowed to just wander around. She would have a full schedule of things to do as the, returned noble person. And Jenna, of course, while doing all of this, is battling a major crush on her straight friend. Who among us can say that has not happened to? But I love this because you have the sapphic pining and Jenna having to come to grips with the fact that her friend is not who she thought she was, even though Cece didn't necessarily hide anything from her. Cece didn't know, but Jenna has to accept it and help her essentially make sure that this arranged marriage works. So there's that added extra angst of she has to help the girl she's had a crush on for years marry someone else. Like, the angst is just perfection. There were some, like, slight indications that there may be, like, something also special about Jenna, and I never got the sequel to this one for review, so this one I did not continue with. I still have not decided exactly my stance on whether or not to pursue those kind of things when there's a series that I don't get the sequels to that I might be interested in reading. I should probably come up with a rule for that for myself. Regardless, this one is another great pick. This one's also the shortest of the bunch, I believe. So if you don't necessarily have space in your TBR for a giant book, this would be the one to pick. Up next is the Shadow Campaign series by Django Wexler. I'm a little bit cheating with this one because it's technically flintlock fantasy, which is basically high fantasy set in, like, the 19th century. This one specifically follows a kind of Napoleon-esque figure as war breaks out and there are, like, demons infecting people and giving them powers and such, and the Catholic Church insert is also evil. So this first book isn't as queer as it could be. You do get hints throughout the story that one of our protagonists, Winter Earinglass, who is a woman undercover as a man to escape things, is troubled by a past relationship with a woman that mysteriously ended in a horrible way, and Winter feels really guilty about it, but you don't know why. And so this book specifically is not as queer as it can get. However, second book onward, it gets a whole lot gayer because not only does Winter find other sapphics, but they become a major facet in the war. Later on, and minor spoilers, but there is an entire battalion of all women, colloquially referred to as the Girls' Own, who is very heavily sapphic, and Winter does have at least a couple sapphic relationships over the course of this story, and there are other characters revealed to be queer in little ways, but again, they're more side characters. So I loved it because not only do we have the battle lesbian that I dream of being as a protagonist, but also you have this whole other slew of characters that she relies on, so there's that community aspect. You have the church, the Catholic Church insert, essentially, as the villains. And while technically, yes, it establishes through minor dialogue that homophobia does exist in the world, like the evil Catholic Church insert has like edicts against it or whatever, it never really affects Winter all that much, to the effect that she kind of forgets it exists because the slums and, you know, the war and all that kind of stuff just obfuscates the need to even think about it. It's very high stakes. It is very like in depth and war and political maneuvering and all of that. The only thing that I would say to its detriment, especially with book one, is it does engage in some light Orientalism because it's following loosely Napoleon. And Napoleon did go to the Middle East and did not treat it well. You see some of the remnants of that, and the people that are called Greyskins are very thinly veiled references to actual Middle Eastern peoples, and they're not portrayed super great. There are a couple decent ones, but like it's not the best. However, if you want something with the same general vibe as The Thousand Names, but that actually deals with colonialism, The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. I read this one pretty recently as of filming this, and I was struck by the similarities because you still have a sapphic romance, but you also have flintlock fantasy vibes, and you have people fighting in a desert nation, but it deals directly with the fallout of being a colony. So this follows Touraine, who was originally abducted from the country of Khazal as a child and was basically brainwashed to be a soldier for the fancy evil empire, and she comes back to her home country basically as a stranger to it. She does not consider it her home anymore. She's still trying to impress all of her superiors in the army, and really thinks that she can pave the way for her fellow Sands, which is a name for all of the other people like her that were abducted from this place and turned into soldiers. But things are not so cut and dry. The princess, who has come with them specifically to get the colony back in line after rebel activity has been picking up, asks Touraine essentially to be her go-between with the rebels to try and talk it down before any violence can happen, because Luca cannot get her throne until she can prove to her uncle that she can rule, and she needs this colony to work specifically. However, as things progress and as things go very wrong and the powder keg explodes, you feel Touraine realizing how evil the Empire is, but also the fact that Luca, that she has a very complicated relationship with, is an extension of that evil empire and is part of the reason that things are going so wrong in the country. And you see Luca, who thinks she's the good one and thinks she's the one offering good deals to these people, not realizing that she can't offer anything that they would actually want, because what they want is their freedom, like that kind of thing. It's so great to watch their relationship like twist and turn and get super angsty, because they are coming from different demographics and different cultural viewpoints, and at certain times Luca has some, let's say, some plans that can get in the way of the negotiations, and it's great how angsty it gets. It gets very dark, a lot of named character deaths. It's also very chunky, but we love that. How many pages was this? Close to 500. I believe it is a duology. So I am interested in the next one. And I definitely would recommend this one for anyone that like wants that hard hitting, let's look colonialism in the face thing, because there's a lot of talk about that, a lot of death, and some gore. So like, be on the lookout for that. It is going to look directly in the face of this kind of war, and also be on the lookout for the messy sapphics, because whoo, these two these two have the most chaotic relationship ever, and I love it. And there are also some side characters that are queer. Not necessarily like really minor side characters, actually pretty like big side characters. Oh, and also now I'm remembering the giant reveal at that one part that was really cool. So a lot of nice revelations and plot twists. But in general, it's a lot if you aren't prepared for all the heavy topics, but is also a fantastic read. And that is it, the list for now. Please let me know if you would like to see another one like this. I know for a fact I have at least one other queer high fantasy on my review list right now that I got to get to eventually. But if you have any other recommendations, please let me know down in the comments below. If you have any recommendations for queer books in general, let me know down in the comments. I am always game for more of those. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.